All right, Ryan Silberfein, thank you so much for joining me again. No thanks to my terrible use of technology. For those who don't know who you are, you're a student at the University of Michigan, class of 2025, and you're the president of the campus Hillel there. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you? Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much. Okay, so this is actually a really chance timing. I know we planned this conversation weeks ago because just this morning in the where was it in the World Socialist website was an article that I found that talked about the escalation of a complaint against the University of Michigan campus chapter of Students for Justice in Palestine. I think they go by the acronym SAFE. Yeah, here we go. Students Allied for Freedom and Equality. And basically, I want to read a passage from this article, and I want to get your reaction to it. So it says, if UMich suspends SAFE, it will mark the first suspension of a legacy student organization in the university's history. The move to effectively ban SAFE for 2 to 4 years is the latest in a series of flagrant attacks on freedom of speech and political expression carried out by the university as part of a nationwide assault on campus protests against the genocide in Gaza and the complicity of the U.S. government and Zionist-linked universities and other institutions. At UMich, this includes police attacks on peaceful protests, the dispersal of a protest encampment last spring, and the filing of felony charges against 11 UMich students who participated in the demonstrations. Ryan, your reaction?
I mean, it's frustrating to use language like that, like quote unquote, the genocide in Gaza. That is not something that we are new to hearing over the past year and a half. That's been something pushed out through our university newspaper. It's been something talked about in our student government meetings. Um, and the Jewish community doesn't take words like that lightly.
Mm-hmm.
Using the word genocide is definitely not something that most of us are comfortable with, given, I mean, its origin and where it came from, with its roots in the Holocaust. And I think in general, that article is very one-sided and biased and is not necessarily telling the whole story. Like talking about flagrant attacks on protesters or attacks on free speech and diversity of thought. If you're going to break the rules that exist about free speech and diversity of thought on campus, like there are rules in place for a reason, and you're going to be held accountable for that. Rules don't exist for no reason. And maybe it's because those rules were not really being enforced last year, and they really only started to be enforced this August and September, but the university has a right to enforce those rules. If you are going to interrupt a speaker's right to communicate with their audience, that is grounds for removal from a space, and that has
Is
been
that
what.
is that written down somewhere? I mean, is that like a
Yes,
rule?
there are rules on our campus for specific like events that are being hosted, or like rules about the diag, the middle of campus, and how
Mm-hmm.
to properly use it. And like you need a permit to um, uh, like request to use that space, and you must be approved for it. And then even within that, there are certain rules of using the diag. Like you can only use amplified sound for a certain period of time during the day. You can only use the electricity in the diag if you have permission to do so, stuff like that. So, for example, at the honors convocation last semester, there's it was a celebration of students' achievements, and it happened at an auditorium here at the university and plastered all over the walls when you like big posters when you walk into the event. And usually there's something you have to read at the beginning of an event stating the rules of like di diversity of thought, diversity of expression, freedom of speech. And the part of the rules that sticks out to me is that you have a right to protest as long as you are not interrupting the speaker or artist's ability to communicate with the audience. Once it crosses that line, then it is grounds for removal or punishment, whatever language they use. Um, like, obviously, it would still be upsetting to me if those people stood in the audience at the honors convocation with red hands and with posters that said certain things, or there were certain people who walked across the stage and didn't want to shake President Ono's hand. Like, while that's still upsetting to me, that is within their right. They're allowed to do that. And that's within the rules. And then once they cross the line of chanting, and while President Ono is addressing the audience, you literally couldn't hear him speak. or they all get on stage and use their signs. They were blocking all of the speakers on the stage. It completely interrupted the ceremony, and that was when there should have been people who stepped in to remove them, but rather it was that the event itself just ended right there. Which I think in hindsight, people have realized was not the correct response to the situation. But I guess I see it like I can understand where they were coming from, why
Mhm.
they ended the event. They didn't want to give attention to something like this, or like give them the space to do that. But
Well,
at the
they
same
did it though,
time,
yeah.
yeah, they did it. And it also wasn't fair to all those people that were there to celebrate their accomplishments, all these people who had family, friends come in to celebrate with them.
Right.
Thankfully, I actually did not go to this event. I've only seen the recordings of it and have heard from friends that were there. But my grandparents were in town from New York, and I almost brought them. That was like part of the reason they came. We almost went.
So did you avoid the event?
No, I didn't know there was going to be a protest. We just decided to go for lunch or do something else.
Why? Oh, okay.
Yeah,
You just happened to not go.
by luck.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm
Okay.
very glad that I was not in that room. I think it would have been really upsetting. I know people that like were very anxious after the fact, even like crying, bawling their eyes out. It really wasn't fair.
Well, and I know I want to touch on something that you also said earlier about reaching out for dialogue, about trying to have some sort of conversation with people who are protesting.
Yeah, that's been an ask of ours for since the beginning. We've basically had two asks that we've brought to administration time and time again is one, we want dialogue. We want to sit in a room and have civil conversations with people so that they can,
With the other students, not
yes.
like to have not to bring in two speakers
Well, that's our other
necessarily,
ask.
but
That's our other ask.
okay.
Yeah, the first ask is to sit down in a room with these other students that maybe have differing opinions than ours and have a conversation, whether it be over food, coffee, whatever. Just humanize each other. Like there is something that we have in common, at least one thing. Like there are definitely shared values between us. And if we could come together over our similarities rather than our differences, we think it would make our like the campus climate would be a lot more palatable. Um, but we have no willing participants in that front. We've reached out time and time again. We get no response. I think the university has reached out like on our behalf and they get no response. I mean, they get no response on their own as well. Like we had the opportunity to, there was a group of Jewish leaders who had the opportunity to speak with administration. The same opportunity was awarded to other people and they just refused to show up. They refused to speak with them, which is not something I personally agree with either. And then, as you mentioned, our second ask has been like a moderated dialogue event
A
type thing
legitimate
that people,
debate.
right, where people could come. You could have experts on all sides of this topic with a moderator who's making sure that the like correct and appropriate questions
Yeah.
are being asked and not one person getting too much airtime and you can really hear and see both sides of it. Unfortunately, this hasn't happened. There have been many events that I think are biased on our campus, like without moderators, it's an echo chamber only showing one side. And the problem with those events too is you're really not getting anyone in the audience that disagrees with you. So it's really just continuously pushing that same agenda onto the same people. Like you're not teaching anyone anything new. Um, but there is this new institute being developed at the university, the Ruhl Wallenberg Institute to Combat
Hmm.
Anti-Semitism, I think is what it's called. So this has been in the works. We've heard about it over the past year, but obviously a project like that takes a really long time to
Right.
actually be formed. Um,
And it will address, maybe things that are said in class or taught.
yeah, I
Does it
think
have any effect on the curriculum?
Yeah, I think it's meant to be a bit about like education. Like the building itself could have like actual exhibits or something along that sort of like educating about the history of anti-Semitism, specifically on Michigan's campus. And I think the experts that work within the institute, I think, would help with the education here. And if there are incidents in the classroom, I'm not sure if that's even fully been developed yet, considering the institute itself doesn't fully exist. We just have the money to create the institute. Um,
Right.
but I know there are some ideas in the works. I just haven't exactly heard of them yet. Um, and it'll be interesting. I think there is an event that's similar to the like a type that I was just talking about, where they're trying to bring in experts and like have a real conversation about this for people to listen to. I heard about it a few weeks ago. I haven't heard anything since, but I'm really hoping that that goes forward because I think that could really help on our campus.
What about like grassroots type of interactions where maybe you catch somebody who has been ingesting a lot of this stuff, maybe even somebody who was in the encampment but really is ignorant to the situation and is uh, knowledgeable with them, self-aware enough that they maybe in a moment where they're privately they see you or somebody else from Hillel, somebody Jewish, and say, hey, what the hell is going on?
Yeah, there have been like I could probably count on my hand how many times that's happened, or at least how many times I've witnessed it. While the encampment was going on, me and a group of other Jewish students tended to hang around in the diag. Just personally, I have a problem where I like have to see and hear these things with my own eyes and ears. Like if it's happening on our campus and I know about it, I have to see it and I have to know that it's happening because I don't want to just hear from someone else what happened. And I want to be able to actually speak on it correctly as well. Um, so, like, for example, my sister's a sophomore here, and the way she handled everything over the last year and a half was to avoid it. Like, she would just change her route to class. She wouldn't walk through the diag, so she wouldn't see it. So it wouldn't be at the forefront of her mind. And I applaud her for being able to do that. But that's just a different way that like she handled it as compared to me. And while I was on the diag, I mean, I was there for like hours at a time each day. There were a few conversations that happened. Personally, I was not the one approaching people, and I actually never got approached either. I don't think I look scary, but I don't think people. There was actually a non-engagement policy that the encampment.
Did you just did you oh so the okay so they said don't talk to you?
Yeah, they like had
I've
flyers
encountered
everywhere.
that, yeah.
They actually said don't speak to outside agitators.
Outside
We were
agitators.
the agitators or provoker, whatever they wanted to call us. So when someone from the encampment genuinely wanted to ask us a question or have a conversation, they were like immediately shut down, and someone more higher up or more in charge would like come over and sweep them away. There were a few conversations that happened though, and I was able to listen to some of them or hear about them after the fact. And it was some people just being like, what is going on here? Like, can someone explain to me? Like, I see that there's clearly like two sides or whatever. Can you explain your side or can you just help me understand what's going on? Because some people, like, as I would always say, that there's
I
like,
mean, would it be considered agitation or provocation if you had just said, like, did you have a sign that said, like, I'm a Zionist, ask me anything?
yeah, we really didn't even bring signs. We would usually just sit there and like sometimes we had a flag or something, but really we had nothing.
Such agitation.
Yeah, I will say there was one sign that said globalize the Intifada that they had up. And it was a huge, like on a sheet, like a real like cloth piece of paper. It was huge. I personally, when I went oftentimes with people, would purposely stand in front of the word Intifada because that word is really triggering for me. The definition of intifadas and aggressive uprising and like I just brings back so many memories that I don't have of my own, but like all the stories that I've heard of the first and second intifada, and for them to want to be globalizing that really, really triggered me and bothered me. So when I would be in the diag or in the area, like we would purposely stand in front of that word to block it. Um, and when people would ask us about it, I would say that, but they didn't seem to care. There were a ton of news crews and reporters that would come in, and I would always find that they would speak to me and then someone from the encampment, and then like that would be their story. And I found oftentimes even the like videos that were being put out or the articles being posted, um, it depended on the source, but some of them I found were quite biased. And they would take one sentence of my 10-minute interview with them, and then they would have five people from the encampment getting quoted, which just it disproportionately tells a story because I think they are
Right.
just such a loud minority on this campus. So it seems
Really?
bigger than it is. I mean, even especially this semester, their protests have gotten smaller and smaller and smaller. And especially with the encampment, I think most of those people that were in the encampment were not students here or faculty. I think
Mm.
they came from outside, which was especially problematic when it came to like agitation. And that's what's happened with a lot of these arrests, like that article that you saw.
Mm.
Most of those people arrested were not students at the University of Michigan, um, which I think just says a lot about the movement and in general. And then there's Jewish students on campus. We're obviously also a minority. We happen to have a pretty large Jewish population here, but at least also
Yeah.
the outspoken people is a very small minority. A lot of people just go about their business, go about their day. And then there's this whole section in the middle of people who aren't necessarily fit in one of those groups, but are obviously affected by this. Like their campus was taken over. They couldn't walk through the diag. They have to they go to class and people run in screaming and protesting and screaming at their professors. Or if they're in Ross, the School of Business here, there were at least 5 protests in Ross last semester. Like while you were studying, hundreds of people would just march through, like making obscene comments and making it actually impossible to do your schoolwork. I know exams were interrupted. Like it was pretty rough.
Has anybody threatened legal action against the university for saying like, listen, you're literally allowing these people to rob me. I'm paying you for an education that I'm not getting because they're blocking and they're blocking me from going to class, or they're, you know, preventing me from studying or participating in campus life as a normal student, and you're allowing it.
Yeah, I think there were some like smaller, like the Canary Project and stuff like that. They
Mm-hmm.
tried to get witnesses from the University of Michigan or stories, individual things. Like we have millions of pictures and videos of things that have happened. Oftentimes, these people are covering their faces, so there's not much to be done on that front. And I know that the administration and the university was threatened by many different people, whether they were like an individual lawyer themselves or like these other like bigger like projects and stuff. Um, I don't know if anything ever came from that, but also I think everybody was just acting in crisis mode last year. Like it was a little bit of uncharted territory. Um, Nobody really knew where to go. Nobody really knew exactly like which rules were being followed and how. Like there was a weird system of reporting things through the university. And like, for example, like if somebody in Ross wanted to report like the thing that was being interrupted, they didn't have a name. So then nothing ever came from it because the university's policy of that is to go through Oscar, the Office of Student Conflict Resolution, I think. And it would be like their step is to put the two of you in a room together. But if you don't know the person that was causing the problem, then nothing happens. And also, most of these times when something happened, like I have a friend who went through Oscar, the person never showed up. Like the same like willing participant conversation that we've been having. So it just nothing really ever came of it. But then come the start of this semester, I think the university really did a 180 and realized, okay, like we can't let this get out of hand before we start intervening. And we have these policies, we must uphold them. And I do think they've done a much better job this semester of doing.
Mm.
For example, we have something called Festival, which is essentially a very large club fair that happens in the Diag over the course of 2 days. And there were signs everywhere that said the Diag is reserved for festival, like any other events will be removed, something along those lines. And as there was a protest that began in the middle of the Diag, marching in a circle and chanting, um, the police and security officers that were there said multiple times, like, leave or you will be removed. I think most people dispersed after those warnings. And then when the remaining few people did not, the police stepped in, which I'm not always a fan of. I will be completely honest. Like, I don't think it's good because
I would agree. Listen, I have trouble. No, I don't. I don't have. I take it back. I think that you have a right to voice to speak your mind. But A, what you say is not free of consequence. And B, speech, insofar as, the First Amendment considers, we have the broad spectrum of what's considered speech. So as long as you're not hindering other people's, And that's I mean, it's very simple. So
Yeah,
I don't have
and
a problem with the police stepping in and doing their job and protecting everybody's rights.
I agree with that. My concern with it is that now it becomes a police brutality issue, and then they turn it
Hmm.
into something larger, which, I mean, first, it just could have been avoided altogether if these people just
Right.
listened to their first few warnings. Like, I don't feel bad necessarily. Like, every time we host an event on the Diag, we follow those rules to a T. Like, we are only allowed to use amplified sound from noon to 1 p.m. We will not start our speaker until noon. Because also, I think there's some like double-edged sword going on of like, if we started our sound at 11:55 a.m., like we would get told not to, and we would get in trouble for it. And like these other people seemingly were allowed to do whatever they wanted last semester, but that didn't mean that we were going to go out and do whatever we wanted. We were still going to follow the rules and like not cause further problems.
So,
Um, well,
yeah,
so
I mean, so do you think the university is showing a bias, or do you think that they maybe just don't know what the hell to do?
I think it was a situation of not knowing what to do last semester and a lot of
Mm.
uncharted territory. And another problem that we ran into was the fact that sometimes the university didn't know this was going on. Like it took a meeting with Jewish leaders to express our concerns of people with disabilities not being able to get through the diag. Like I watched a woman in a wheelchair have to take the route completely outside just to get to class. I watched somebody who is blind with a cane trip over something in the encampment. And then on top of that, they were using like panini presses to make like grilled cheeses or whatever they were making. Like that's a fire hazard to me. If there were a fire in Hatcher, the library they were in front of, that would have been a problem. Fire trucks would not have been able to get through. They were using amplified sound way outside that window and it was interrupting classrooms. Like if you were in Mason Hall right across the way, you could hear what was going on at the encampment. So these were some of the things that we brought to administration and at least their response to
How
us,
could they not know?
they claim they didn't know. At least the higher ups like did not were not made aware of this.
So that's what I'm saying. It's like, you know, you can feign ignorance for so long. Like if you have classes that the students can literally hear, like the teacher should have said knew, presumably. The
Yeah.
teacher already is there.
Yeah, well, there's issues with that with our faculty, especially the graduate student union. That has been
Mm.
a source of a lot of our problems. It's the only union, it's the only like labor union that they have. So any of the graduate student instructors, if they want to be a part of one, that's the one they're a part of. And the president or whoever else is like on the board of it has just been using it to push their own political agenda. Like they will be at every protest with like their
Oh, they're part of the SAFE SJP and
oh,
everything
yeah,
else.
yeah, yeah. They push that agenda. They tweet it on their own account. Like the GEO account will be tweeting these things, which is just simply not fair to these other people. It should not be a source of them pushing their political agenda. And then it's forced a lot of people to actually leave their labor union, which also is like completely not fair to those people, whether they're Jewish, Zionist, or not. Um,
Hmm.
it's been a real problem. And then it becomes a real problem in classrooms because these are the authority figures in the classroom. And these are the people who are handing out flyers or encouraging people to go to certain events or canceling class for strikes. That's when it becomes a problem.
So I want to say, like, I want to ask, like, what's like the worst moment on campus? Like, did it come right after October the 7th, 2023? Was it the re-explosion after the ICC handed down arrest warrants, you know, that we saw that was very seemingly coordinated. You know, like what was like, or maybe a specific incident that sticks out in your mind. What's like the single worst thing that happened, and then I want to follow that up with the total opposite, but we'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah. I'm trying to think because there were obviously, unfortunately, a lot of awful things that happened. Um,
Mm.
and I'm trying to decipher the difference between like what like felt the biggest or most impactful to me versus like what maybe actually had the largest negative impact. Um, I really do think that the encampment itself was a big problem because it was always visible. It interrupted almost all aspects of school and life on campus and being able to go to classrooms. And it also just showed like we can break the rules and nothing's going to happen. They did not have a permit to be in the diag. Nobody is allowed to get a permit in the diag for that certain week. It was final study days and finals. Nobody is allowed to rent the diag those weeks. So it was just especially frustrating that like people were getting away with breaking all of these rules over and over and over again, and there were seemingly no consequences. Um, I also think it was particularly unfortunate because obviously stuff had been like happening all semester, but it really wasn't that bad or that big of a deal. And then it just like exploded again. My other answer to that is probably student, like central student government, though. Um, it felt really large at the time. And to be completely honest, I just simply do not care anymore about student government. I think they really don't have any weight on this campus whatsoever. It's a bunch of people
Hmm.
like pretend playing politics, which if that's their thing, great. But it's not necessarily like I'm not worried about the things that they're like the resolutions they're writing, the petitions they're writing, because they really don't actually hold that much water on this campus. But at first, it felt like the biggest deal in the world. I was going to every single one of those meetings. I was assigned as a speaker. Some of these meetings went for 5, 6 hours long. I'm sure you've like heard about some of this happening in other campuses as
I've
well.
seen some of them.
Yeah, it was pretty rough. And I mean, there was like, I spoke. And the thing is, like, I felt like when me and other Jewish students were speaking, we were always saying, like, we understand the hurt that everybody is going through. Like, you can't say that, like, there's a winner in this situation. Like, everybody's a loser. And we want, like, better education about anti-Semitism and Islamophobia and racism. Like, we would always include everyone in our statements and what we were saying. And that same thing was not being like, we did not get that. And at the same time, like there would be, I spoke and
Do
then,
you? I want to ask you about that because I see that a lot. I see that trend a lot where we want to be fair. I say we as like the global people,
yeah,
where we want to be fair to other people's plights, and so we dilute a poignant message in order to be fair. And what I mean by that is not that we should be unfair to other people's issues, but that if we want to diagnose a problem, we don't say, and by the way, there are other problems, because it just kind of diverts attention. So, insofar as like Islamophobia and anti Semitism, like Islamophobia is a problem. No question. That is a problem. It's a disproportionate problem. I mean, they make up 1% of the United States, and it's something like 2 or 3% of hate crimes and things like that. Like that is a huge issue, right? But then I hear, like you just said, you would say they're talking about Islamophobia. You're talking about anti-Semitism and racism and Islamophobia, and you know what I mean? And that's the thing. It's like, and that dilutes the core issue, where then we see the statistics and it says, okay, Islamophobia is a disproportionate problem and anti-Semitism is a much more disproportionate problem. And then we're not looking at that. What do you think about that?
yeah. And I hear what you're saying. And again, it's nobody else gives us the same, whatever you want to call it. Like we'll always do this for other people and we never get the same in return, which is frustrating. But I think, at least with central student government, the thought was if we only speak about anti-Semitism, there are
Sure.
maybe 2 or 3 people on this assembly that would listen to us or care or hear what we have to say. If we come in from a more broad viewpoint and talk about all of this and all of the problems that exist and lump anti-Semitism and the issues that we've been facing in with that, we're more likely to get where we want to go. Um, and it was still without sacrificing our values. We never said anything we didn't agree with.
Hmm.
But I think it just took that level of understanding of who we were speaking to. Um,
Yeah.
and it wasn't also just to combat the other speakers that were saying certain things. It was, we're coming here on our own accord and we have our own things to say. You might be saying your own thing as well, but we also have things that we'd like to say. And my problem with that was the meetings got really heated. I mean, apparently, even this past semester, there were like threats and like police had to escort people out of the meeting, which I thought was pretty crazy. Like, thankfully, I wasn't there. As I said, I stopped caring. I haven't been to a student government meeting since October and November of 2023. But also part of the reason I stopped going was like there were individual speakers who would get up there after me and like literally turn and face me and look me in the eye and address me and call me a settler colonialist or racist person. Like I won't stand for that. Like they don't know me, they don't know my values. And for them to accuse me of that was quite ridiculous. So,
Yeah, I mean, you make a really good point actually. Um, I would agree with you that I think you. It sounds to me like what you're saying is like that if you kind of just focus on the one issue and you put blinders on, then you're talking to yourselves. Um, that's interesting. So I mean, but have coalitions have like new coalitions been built? I guess let's go back. Let's jump it back a bit to the original questions that I was going to ask. Right, like what was the best moment on campus? You know what I mean? Like maybe something that was so uplifting and so touching
yeah.
that you were like, "Wow, I did not expect that," especially given the deluge of God
Yeah.
knows what.
I think that has been something that we've been asking ourselves as well of like we shouldn't be acting in crisis mode all the time. Like our job, like we should be focusing on Jewish joy. Like that is what we're here to do,
Right.
not just here to hold space and comfort people like after something upsetting happens. While we're still here to do that, we should also be proactively planning things that are awesome and exciting for the Jewish community. I think the first example of something we did, which is still like one of the biggest and feels pretty awesome, was we hosted Alex Edelman, Jewish comedian, and we had him in an auditorium that seats 1,000. And it was just a night of laughter and joy and like forgetting everything else going on. This was in January. So it was like right after we came back from break, like people were feeling pretty down. And we heard such positive feedback from that, which I think was also just validating and reassuring that like, okay, like there's still hope here on this campus. Like not everything is bad. So I think that was pretty awesome. And then the other like broader thing I think is just that the Jewish community came together. We have three Jewish organizations, like large Jewish organizations on our campus. We have Hillel, which is the largest. We also have a Chabad, and we have a Jewish Resource Center. Um, and in the past few years, like the three have kind of operated independently, really not coming together on many things. I think there's been a lot of tensions because we don't always have the same religiosity or values, but at the end of the day, we're all Jewish organizations seeking to support the Jewish students on campus here at Michigan. And I think we really saw the three organizations come together, even while we still disagree sometimes. I think it also really came from the students, like myself and the president of the JRC and the president of Chabad, I think really pushed those relations as well. Like while the adults might not always agree, like we're all friends, the students. So that made it a lot easier to work with everyone. And I think the big like culmination of all of that was our 1 year since October 7th event and planning. We had
Yeah.
the diag rented all day. We properly got the permit and everything for 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. We had exhibits out in the diag all day. We had four different like quadrants. We had like the Nova exhibit in one corner. We had like destruction in the entire region, the north and Gaza and Lebanon. Like that was a whole section, which goes back to again of us not just talking about ourselves. Uh,
Yeah.
and like I think if that actually went, people really saw that and recognized that. We had a section about the kibbutzim and the destruction that happened. Um, yeah, it was just like all like it was meant to look like Hostage Square in Tel Aviv, essentially. And I think we really achieved that. We had such beautiful artwork pieces, and we even collaborated with the Ann Arbor greater community on that, like the Jewish community. We had the Ann Arbor Federation, we had the local synagogues, which in my time and most of the staff's time here, like that has never happened in the past 10 years, which is a little crazy to me. I mean, we have different audiences, but we're all Jewish and we're all in the same area. We might as well work together. And at the end, at like 5 or 6 p.m., we all put on a vigil together that was about an hour long, where the rabbis from the congregations nearby spoke, the CEO of the Ann Arbor Federation spoke, me and the other student presidents spoke, and I think it really brought everyone together. And I heard such like amazing feedback from that, people saying that's what they really needed on such a horrible anniversary like October 7th. And then we hosted a private dinner after where administrators were there and a lot of students were there. And that was the Hillel governing board put that on. We had a like ballroom rented out at the university, and we had two Israelis come speak, both of whom were greatly impacted by October 7th. So that was obviously really sad. And you're asking for like the best thing that happened. Obviously, it was a very sad day, but I think it was very necessary for the Jewish community, and that's the feedback that we heard.
Wow, that's amazing. That's a really powerful, organized event. Have you seen a like an absorption or like an attraction? This is my final question. Um, to maybe some of the Jews who are in the encampment, because I saw this. I don't know if it happened at UMich, but I saw this on like some other encampments where like during Sukkot, you had people building a sukkah and saying it's like this is like that. I think it was at Harvard, and then at the same time it was like a Jewish writer at the Crimson saying like we're fine in the diaspora, we should go back. So that's what we should do. And I was like, you guys you don't know anything about Judaism, even though you are one. And I think that's maybe where the disconnect comes through. Have you brought into the coalition?
Yeah, I mean, we did not previously have a chapter of Jewish Voice for Peace here, and then they reemerged.
Really?
Um, they came back after October 7th. There were definitely a few students who used to be involved in Hillel, were student leaders here, involved in clubs, and have now completely left to go there, which teach their own. Um, I said this
Sure.
in an interview last year. We're still a Jewish organization striving to represent the Jewish students at the University of Michigan. So if there is somebody who like identifies as Jewish, like they are welcome at our Shabbat table. They're welcome here for dinner. But we also hold certain values. And we've actually been workshopping our Hillel, like our mission, vision, and values for the past year, which was a project that was a long time coming. But I think we've also like really been using the experience of the past year to kind of shape them. Like, okay, if we're asking student leaders to uphold these values and really represent and like move towards this mission and this vision, what do we want them to look like? Because this happened this past year, like how would we use that? We're still a Zionist organization, but like that was even a conversation of do we include the word Zionist in our mission, vision, or
Wow.
values? Like, is that now some like buzzword trigger word where we can say we support Israel without necessarily using that word, which would deter a lot of people? I know that one of our rabbis here, like, even went to the encampment when they were hosting a Passover Seder or something.
Tried to
She
talk to some people.
just wanted to talk to people, not like convince them one way or another, but just have a conversation. And then I don't even think it ended up happening. Again, this whole conversation of willing participants. Um,
Yeah.
it's really frustrating. And it's even more frustrating because they claim to speak for all Jews, which I think is always a problem, this tokenism that keeps
Right.
happening. I think on both sides, like an organization brought in a speaker here who left Gaza and now speaks is completely pro-Israel. Like that's also tokenism, and we can't listen to these few
Right.
individuals that claim to speak for everyone. But I will say it is a very, very small minority on our campus and really not that big of our problems.
All right. Well, I think you've given everybody who will watch this something to look forward to. I hope. You've
Me
inspired me,
too.
honestly, and I'm very curious. I'm very excited to read this new Hillel mission statement and expose, I guess, when it comes out. Ryan Silberfein, thank you so much again for joining me. It was an honor to have you on.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for watching the podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation, please support the podcast and the channel by liking, commenting, sharing, subscribing, etc. It really, really helps. It's very much appreciated. Love you. Be kind. Stay curious. Stay cool.